So this is about cardiovascular system, and under that we are going to talk about structure and function of the heart. So before going into the heart, you need to know about the basic plan of the human circulatory system. And this diagram shows the basic plan. As you all know, the main pump of the circulatory system is the heart, which has a right side and a left side. And the heart has 4 chambers. The upper chambers are the atria and the lower chambers are the ventricles. The right side of the heart is responsible for taking in deoxygenated blood and sending it to the lungs. So the deoxygenated blood, that is blood which has less oxygen and a lot of carbon dioxide, from the lower limbs and the trunk are drained via the inferior vena cava, shown here. And this deoxygenated blood, shown in blue color, then enters the right atrium. Similar to that, from the upper part of your body, from the head, neck and the upper limbs, deoxygenated blood will drain through the superior vena cava and drain into the right atrium. And from the right atrium they will go to the right ventricle, and from the right ventricle this blood is pumped into the lungs, and in the lungs there will be gas exchange and oxygen is added to the blood while carbon dioxide diffuse out of the blood, and now the blood is called oxygenated. That is, there's a lot of oxygen and less amount of carbon dioxide, and this oxygenated blood then via the pulmonary veins, shown here in red color, will go into the left side of the heart, to the left the atrium, and then to the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle it will go into the aorta and will be distributed throughout the body, supplying oxygen to tissues of the whole body. This is the basic structure of the heart, and with this understanding, let's look at the heart, the structure of the heart. So when you consider the walls of the heart, there are mainly 3 layers. We have the pericardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium. The outermost layer is the pericardium, the innermost layer is the endocardium, and between these two there is the myocardium. So first we'll look at the pericardium. Pericardium again has 2 layers. The outermost layer is the parietal pericardium, and the innermost layer is the visceral pericardium, shown here. And in between these two, there's a potential space known as the pericardial space, and this pericardial space has pericardial fluid in it. And in some disease conditions there can be collection of blood in this potential space and can cause problems. Then the middle layer is the myocardium. It is made of the cardiac muscle, and it forms the main bulk of the wall of the heart and is responsible for the contraction of the heart. And then lining that, the most interior lining would be the endocardium, and this is a layer of epithelial tissue, very thin layer, which also is continuous with the endothelium of the great vessels. Now the interior of the heart. So heart is a very muscular organ. It is roughly conical shape situated in the chest in between the lungs, little bit towards the left side. And the heart is mainly divided into a right side and a left side by this interventricular septum. So here we have the right side and then the left side. And again, the right side is divided into the right atrium, which is the upper chamber, and the right ventricle, which is the lower chamber. Similar to that, the left side is also divided into an atrium and a ventricle. And this division, the right atrium if you take the right atrium and right ventricle, separated by the atrioventricular AV valves. And when you look at the thickness of these walls, you can appreciate that the wall thickness of the ventricles is much higher than that of the atrial wall. This is because the ventricles have to create more force during their contractions than the atria. And also, if you look at this picture, I think you can appreciate that the left ventricle wall thickness is much more higher compared to the wall thickness of the right ventricle. That is because, as I mentioned in the basic plan of the circulatory system, the left ventricle has to pump blood to all the tissues and organs of the body, and the right side only pumps blood to the lungs. So left side has to create a lot of force compared to right side, and that is why the thickness is more in the left ventricle. And then in between the atria and ventricle there are the valves, the AV valves. These are important to maintain a unidirectional blood flow from atria to the ventricles and to prevent blood backflowing from the ventricles to the atria. So in the right side, here you have the tricuspid valve, and in the left side you have the bicuspid valve, also called mitral valve. So let's look at these. The right side, the tricuspid valve, is given its name because it has 3 cusps. In the left side, the mitral valve only has 2 cusps. And these valves are attached to the wall of the ventricle into these conical shaped muscular projections known as the papillary muscles. And this attachment is via these fibers known as chordae tendineae. And this is very important to prevent these valves turning inside out during the contractions, to prevent backflow of blood. So when there are problems in these valves, as an example, if a valve gets blocked, or we call it stenosis, the blood cannot flow from atria to the ventricles. And similarly, if a valve is not competent enough, during its closure there will be backflow of blood known as regurgitation, and they give rise to these valvular heart diseases. And sometimes when these problems are very severe, we have to replace these valves. Similar to this, at the beginning of the pulmonary trunk and the aorta, there are valves. That is also to prevent or to maintain the unidirectional blood flow. So, the beginning of the pulmonary trunk, you have the pulmonary valve here and the aortic valve. These are known as semilunar valves. And when we look at the openings into these chambers, so look at the right atrium. There are many opening of the superior vena cava at the upper part of it, and opening of the inferior vena cava at the lower part of it. So as I mentioned previously, they carry deoxygenated blood into the right atrium, and then from the right ventricle, in the upper part of it, there's the opening of the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary trunk, and the pulmonary trunk then divides into a right and a left branch, which will carry deoxygenated blood to the two lungs. And in the right side, in the left side, to the left atrium, 4 pulmonary veins open, and they will bring the oxygenated blood from the lungs into this left atrium, and from left atrium to the left ventricle, and at the upper end of the left ventricle you have the opening of the aorta, and at the beginning of the aorta it gives rise to coronary arteries, a left and a right coronary artery, which are important to supply blood to the heart itself. And then the aorta will divide into the major arteries, and then to the branches of it, the arteries and arterioles, and at the tissue level will divide and form the capillary bed. And from this capillary bed there will be formation of the venules and veins, ultimately forming the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, which carry deoxygenated blood to the right side of the heart. That is the interior of the human heart. Next, we are going to look at the conduction system of the heart. This is a very important system which is formed by specialized set of cells situated within the myocardium, and the function of it is to create the electrical impulses and act as a circuit that carry these impulses to the cardiac muscle and making it contract. So in the conduction system there are mainly 4 components. We have the SA node, sinoatrial node, AV node, atrioventricular node, the bundle of His, and then the Purkinje fibers. Let's look at each of them. First, the SA node. The SA node is situated in the right atrium near the opening of the superior vena cava. This is also called the pacemaker of the heart because the SA node can independently generate a heartbeat and also maintain the rhythm of the heart. So without any external influences, this SA node can make the heart beat. But even though I mentioned that, there are factors that can influence this. These are the factors. The impulses from the autonomic nervous system and hormones like adrenaline and thyroxine, and also factors like temperature can influence this and regulate the heartbeat. As an example, when a person is excited, the sympathetic nervous system is activated and circulating adrenaline levels will go up, and they will affect on this SA node and will increase the heart rate. And then after the SA node we have the AV node. It is situated in between the two atria, and it is responsible for sending these impulses from atria to the ventricles. And then the AV node then forms a bundle of His, also known as atrioventricular bundle. Now this bundle then divides into two branches, left and right, and then into these small fibers known as Purkinje Fibers. They travel via the interventricular septum towards the apex of the heart, and then, as you can see here, spread throughout the cardiac muscle of the ventricles. So when an impulse is generated from the SA node, as shown here in the red arrows, it will travel throughout the atrial cardiac muscle, and when it reaches the AV node, it is carried via the bundle of His, and then its branches and then the Purkinje fibers towards the apex of the heart, and from there these impulses will go upwards and from into outwards of the myocardium, causing it to contract. And this is how this system regulates these electrical impulses and regulate the conduction of the contraction of the heart. Then next thing is we have to look at the function of the human heart. Here we have the cardiac cycle. It has mainly three components. We have systole and diastole. Systole is contraction and diastole is the relaxation. So as shown here in the diagram, the atrial systole is contraction of the atria. The ventricular systole is the contraction of the ventricles. And then complete cardiac diastole is relaxation of the atria and ventricles both. So the cardiac cycle is about 0.8 seconds, and it is divided like this. You can see the complete cardiac diastole is 0.4 seconds, the atrial systole is 0.1 second, and the ventricular systole is 0.3 seconds. And then let's look at each one of them. Okay, so when we first we'll start with the cardiac diastole. Before that, I have to mention that humans have a dual circulatory system. That is, at the same time there are two systems functioning. We have the pulmonary system, which sends blood from the right side of the heart to the lungs, and then the left side we have the blood going from the aorta to the tissues of the body. So now let's look at the cardiac diastole. Diastole is the relaxation. So at this time both the atria and ventricles are relaxing, and blood is coming to the heart in the right side from the SVC and the IVC to the right atrium, and then from to the left side from the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. And since the pressure in the atria is more than that of the ventricles, this blood passively flow into the ventricles and fill the ventricles. And to maintain this direction, the AV valves here they remain open, and to prevent blood flowing back from these major arteries to the ventricles, the semilunar valves are closed at this time, shown here. So with the filling of the ventricles, the ventricular pressure will slowly increase, and then at the end of the diastole there is some amount of blood remaining in the atria, and now the atria have to contract and push this remaining blood into the ventricles. This is what happens in the atrial systole. Now the ventricles are filled with blood and the ventricular pressure is high. So at this moment the AV valves close and the ventricles they start contracting, and we call it ventricular systole. So during this time the atria are relaxing, so the atria at diastole. So when the ventricles contract, the pressure inside the ventricles go up, and because of that the semilunar valves open. So the blood will flow from the ventricles into the major arteries, from the right ventricle to the pulmonary trunk, and from the left ventricle to the aorta. And then from the pulmonary trunk, this deoxygenated blood will travel into the lungs, and from the left side to the aorta. And aorta at the beginning of it give coronary arteries. These are two left and right side coronary artery which are responsible for supplying blood to the heart itself, and then it divides into major arteries, and which further divide and divide. So they form arteries, then arterioles, and at tissues they will form capillary bed, and from the capillaries they will form the venous system, the venules, and then the veins, which ultimately will form the IVC and the SVC, which bring back blood into the heart. So in a normal healthy adult, the heart rate, that is heartbeats per minute, is about 60 to 80. But this vary in between individuals. As an example, in an athlete, the normal heart rate will be low. It can be 60, even 50. And the amount of blood that is pumped by a ventricle during one contraction is known as a stroke volume. And the cardiac output is the amount of blood the heart pumps through the circulatory system in a minute. So we can calculate the cardiac output by like this: stroke volume into the heart rate. So if we take the average heart rate to be 70 beats per minute and the average stroke volume to be 70 to 80 milliliters per beat, then your cardiac output is 5000 milliliters per minute. So simply that means during a minute your heart pumps about 5 liters of blood. This is the cardiac cycle. And now go back to this diagram which shows the basic plan of the circulatory system and try to work it out. The venous blood enters from the tissues carrying oxygenless blood to the right side of the heart, and then they are sent to the lungs and then come back to the left side of the heart with a lot of oxygen and less carbon dioxide, and then flow into the left ventricle, and again this oxygenated blood go throughout the body supplying oxygen to the tissues. That's how the cardiovascular system works. Go through this, follow the arrows and try to understand the system and read more.